I want you to just imagine for a second that you are crammed inside a walled city.
Right, a highly claustrophobic situation.
Exactly.
Fully.
It's 425 BCE. It's the dead of winter in Athens. And, we all know the broader strokes of the Peloponnesian War from history class, but I
Yeah.
really want to focus on the suffocating reality of this specific moment.
It's grim, really grim.
Yeah, outside those walls, your ancestral farms are literally being burned to ash. And inside, a plague has just completely ravaged the overcrowded population. You are standing shoulder to shoulder with thousands of displaced, deeply traumatized people.
And your leaders aren't helping at all.
No, not at all. Your political leaders are locked in this endless, venomous debate, just paralyzed by factionalism. So what do? You step away from the mass graves and the screaming assembly, and you go sit down in the theater of Dionysus.
Which is freezing, by the way.
Right, it's winter.
Yeah.
And on stage, an ordinary farmer looks out at the audience, basically throws his hands up, and declares that since the politicians absolutely refuse to make peace, he's simply going to sign his own private peace treaty. Like he is just opting out of the apocalypse.
I mean, it is the ultimate fantasy of the disenfranchised, right?
Totally.
When the systemic machinery of a civilization breaks down so completely, the idea of drawing a circle around your own house and just declaring it a sovereign, peaceful nation, it isn't just funny. It's a deeply provocative act of rebellion.
It really is. And you were watching the Acharnians, which is this uproarious, biting, and highly obscene political satire by Aristophanes. But our mission for this deep dive today is to look at this 2,400-year-old pagan comedy through a really unexpected lens.
Yeah, we're taking a pretty wild turn here.
We are. We have this stack of research today that maps the full text of this play, specifically the Project Gutenberg translation against the Hebrew Bible, specifically 2 Samuel and the New Testament writings of the Apostle Paul.
Which, on the surface, sounds crazy.
Right. We are asking a question that seems entirely counterintuitive. How can this play, a comedy about a guy making a fake peace treaty, trading human spy for a fish, and celebrating with courtesans, how can that actually deepen a Christian's faith?
Yeah, how does the underlying grammar of a satire illuminate the theology of Romans 5?
Exactly. And how can a pagan comedy inspire you to love Christ more deeply and live for him more fully in your daily life?
I mean, it sounds like we are trying to force a puzzle piece into the wrong box, honestly.
It does.
Taking a Greek sex comedy that's driven by absurdity and subjecting it to rigorous theological and linguistic analysis feels inherently dangerous. Like, aren't we just making things up? But the connection isn't something we're just projecting onto the text.
But it's not just a surface-level comparison.
No, it is baked into the very syntax of the play. But to understand the mechanism of how this works, we have to look past the historical trivia of the Peloponnesian War. We have to focus on the psychological pressure cooker of the Linnea Festival.
Okay, yes, because if we want to extract the theology, we first have to understand the trauma of the audience, right?
Exactly.
Like, we know Pericles ordered the rural citizens to abandon the countryside and hide behind the long walls of Athens.
Yeah?
And we know the plague of 430 BCE wiped out tens of thousands of people. So what is the psychological state of the audience sitting in the cold on those stone benches?
They are experiencing what modern psychologists would absolutely call complex systemic trauma.
Wow.
Yeah. The strategy to abandon the farms wasn't just an economic loss for these people. For an ancient Greek, your land was your identity.
Right, it's tied to your ancestors.
Exactly. It was where your ancestors were buried. So you have a massive population of charcoal burners and farmers living in these squalid makeshift huts right in the city center.
They're crammed in there.
Right. And Thucydides tells us people were dying like sheep. The bodies were just piling up at the temples. And then, when Pericles dies of the plague, the political vacuum is filled by this guy, Cleon.
Cleon. The demagogue.
Right. He's a demagogue who thrives on this exact kind of public anxiety. Cleon's entire platform relies on promising total, absolute victory and violently crushing any dissenting voice that even suggests a negotiated peace.
So he essentially weaponizes their Greece.
He absolutely does.
He tells them that if they compromise now, all that suffering, all the death, was for nothing. So the people who actually want the war to end, which are the displaced farmers, they are shouted down as traitors.
Yeah, it creates a terrifying environment.
It's like a broken pressure cooker.
Yeah.
The Spartans are cranking up the heat outside, the walls trap all the steam inside, and guys like Cleon have literally welded the release valve shut. Speaking the truth in the assembly is practically a death sentence.
Which brings us to the absolute genius of the Lanaya festival.
Right, because if everyone is so miserable, how is a comedy the right response?
Well, because it was held in winter, the seas were just too treacherous for maritime travel, so there were no foreign dignitaries in the audience, no allied ambassadors to impress.
Oh, I see. It was just the locals.
Exactly. It was a closed loop, just the traumatized Athenians.
Mhm.
This festival provided a licensed space for what the Greeks called parrhesia, absolute free speech. When public policy fails so completely, absurdity becomes the only safe vehicle for truth.
Wow.
Aristophanes forces them to look at the sheer madness of their political gridlock by taking the logic of the state and just turning it completely upside down.
Okay, let's get into the actual mechanics of how he does that, because the plot is just wild. Our protagonist is a guy named Dicaeopolis, and his name literally translates to just citizen, right?
Right? The righteous citizen.
Yeah, and he is sitting on the funix, the assembly hill, just fuming.
Mhm.
The politicians are arguing over petty nonsense, totally ignoring the war.
Yeah.
So Dicaeopolis decides that if the state won't save him, he will just save himself.
A very DIY approach to salvation.
Very DIY. He hires this divine envoy named Amphitheus to run to Sparta and literally purchase a private truce, like out of his own pocket.
And notice how Aristophanes physicalizes abstract concepts here. That's a key comedic tool. Peace isn't a document on parchment, it's a consumable resource.
It's something you can literally taste.
Exactly. Amphitheus comes running back from Sparta, dodging these angry mobs along the way, carrying 3 samples of peace, and they are represented on stage as skins of wine of different vintages.
I want to look closely at the text here, because the sensory details are just brilliant. Amphitheus offers him a 5-year truce. Dicaeopolis takes a sip, spits it out, and complains that it smells like pitch and naval yards.
Right, it's not real peace.
No, it's just a ceasefire so the politicians can build more warships.
Mm.
So then he tries the 10-year truce, and he says it smells like ambassadors stalling for time.
Which is exactly what was happening in real life.
Exactly. Finally, Amphitheus hands him the 30-year peace. Dicaeopolis drinks it deep, and he declares it smells of ambrosia and nectar. He accepts it, he ratifies it for himself and his household alone, and he declares his own property an independent sovereign zone.
It is the ultimate rejection of the collective.
Yeah. It's like if your neighborhood HOA banned all food deliveries, so you
Yeah.
just declare your own house an independent sovereign nation so you can order a pizza.
That is a perfect analogy. But, Aristophanes knows that you can't just secede from your community without consequences. The chorus of the play, the group that comments on the action, they represent the old, tough-as-nails charcoal burners of Acharni.
The Acharnians.
The-
Title of the play.
Exactly. These are the men whose vineyards were physically chopped down by the Spartan armies. So when they hear that Dicaeopolis has made a private peace, they don't see a hero.
Oh no, they see a traitor.
Right. They gather stones in their cloaks and they prepare to literally execute him on the spot.
And this leads to one of the most brilliant meta-theatrical defense scenes in ancient literature. Dicaeopolis knows they won't listen to reason, so he grabs a hostage.
But it's not a normal hostage.
No, he doesn't grab a child or a woman. He grabs a basket of Acharnian charcoal. He pulls out a sword and threatens to literally gut the coal basket if they don't give him a hearing.
It's so absurd.
It is. He is mocking their obsessive attachment to their livelihoods while simultaneously parodying the serious hostage scenes from high tragedy. And the crazy thing is, it works. They drop their stones.
They do. But before he delivers his actual defense speech, he insists he needs the right costume to elicit their pity. And this is where Aristophanes actively blends low comedy with high tragedy.
Right, he goes to the house of a real playwright.
Yeah, he goes to the house of Euripides, the famous tragic playwright, and asks to borrow the props from a lost play called Telephus. In that specific tragedy, a king disguises himself in filthy beggar's rags to plead for his life.
So he's layering parody on top of parody.
Exactly. By donning these rags, Dicaeopolis stands in front of the chorus and delivers a speech that completely unravels the justification for the entire war.
Right, he argues that this devastating decade-long apocalypse didn't start over noble ideals at all. He traces it back to a petty dispute involving stolen courtesans.
Which is a direct, mocking reference to the real-life Megarian decree.
Yeah. He essentially looks at the audience and says, our farms are burning, our families are dying of plague, and we are doing this over some kidnapped prostitutes. It's shocking. But his rhetoric is so effective, he actually wins over half the chorus.
And then he immediately pivots to the economy?
Yes,
Okay.
he opens a free trade market right in his front yard. And the desperation of the surrounding city-states becomes the punchline for these really dark market scenes.
Yeah, because of the Athenian blockade, places like Megara were enduring absolute famine. So when Dicaeopolis opens his market, a starving Megarian arrives. But he has absolutely nothing of value to trade.
And kept his kids?
Right, except his 2 young daughters. And knowing that selling human beings in this manner is deeply problematic and shameful, he disguises them.
The disguise is so dark.
It really is. He puts fake pig snouts on them, shoves them into a sack, and literally commands them to squeak like piglets.
And Dicaeopolis completely plays along. He trades salt and garlic for these quote-unquote piglets. I mean, on the surface, it's a grotesque slapstick joke with funny noises. But beneath the surface, it is a devastating critique.
Absolutely.
War strips away human dignity until a father is forced to traffic his own children just for a bulb of garlic. It's brutal.
Aristophanes is taking the audience's real-life economic terror and just dialing the hyperbole to maximum. And then right after that, we see the arrival of a Boeotian trader.
Oh, this scene is great.
He brings this impossible bounty, ducks, woodcocks, hares, and the ultimate ancient luxury, Copaic eels.
Dicaeopolis hasn't seen an eel in 6 years. He is ecstatic.
But the Boeotian trader doesn't want silver. He wants to trade for a commodity that is uniquely abundant in Athens.
Informers.
Yes, the informer.
The market spies and sycophants who enforce Cleon's oppressive trade laws. So Dicaeopolis grabs a live human informer, ties him up, and packs him tightly into a wooden crate full of hay.
Like he's a vase or something.
Exactly. He treats the government spy like a fragile piece of pottery so the Boeotian can just carry him off. It's pure, distilled wish fulfillment. The ordinary citizen literally exporting the corrupt bureaucracy.
And this creates a stark duality in the play. You have Dicaeopolis, the so-called trader, feasting and celebrating the rural festivals. He represents life, abundance, and peace.
Right.
But on the other side, you have the state-sanctioned hero, the Athenian general Lamachus, who represents war, duty, and suffering. Aristophanes constantly juxtaposes them to highlight the absurdity of the state's values.
And the finale makes this contrast perfectly clear. Lamachus is ordered out into a freezing snowstorm to guard the mountain passes. Meanwhile, Dicaeopolis is invited to a massive indoor feast.
The parallel dialogue here is brilliant.
It really is. Lamachus shouts for his shield. Dicaeopolis shouts for a wine cup. Lamachus asks for his spear. Dicaeopolis asks for roasted sausages. And it ends exactly how you'd expect. Lamachus falls into a ditch, cracks his skull on a rock, and limps onto the stage groaning in agony.
Well, Dicaeopolis just rolls in, having the time of his life.
Yeah, Dicaeopolis staggers in, completely drunk, flanked by courtesans, singing a victory song.
It is the total triumph of the individual over the collective disaster.
Okay, so I completely see the literary brilliance here. The satire is sharp. But let me step in and challenge the core premise of our deep dive.
Please do.
Because I read this and I see a guy who abandons his suffering neighbors, negotiates a totally selfish deal, gets drunk, and basically buys human beings.
Yeah.
It's hilarious, it's dark, but where on earth is the theology?
That's the big question.
Right. Mapping a playwright's raunchy political satire directly to Holy Scripture feels intellectually dangerous. Like, are we just pattern matching where there isn't an actual pattern? Are we just superimposing our Christian worldview onto a pagan who just wanted to make his traumatized friends laugh at some politicians?
That is exactly the right skepticism to bring to this. It really is. Because if the connection relied solely on the plot, you know, a guy making peace, it would be a very weak, superficial analogy.
Right. Just coincidence.
Exactly. But the researchers aren't just looking at the plot. They are analyzing the underlying architecture of the Greek text itself. The theology isn't found in the jokes about the eels or the wine. It is found in the grammar.
The grammar.
Yes. We are looking at how human beings universally encode their desperation for salvation into the very structure of language. And this requires us to look at systemic functional linguistics, or SFL.
All right, define SFL for me. How does a linguistic framework bridge the gap between a Greek comedy and biblical theology? Because you're losing me a bit.
Okay, let's unpack this. SFL, particularly when integrated with Dr. Constantine Campbell's verbal aspect framework, doesn't just look at what words mean in a dictionary. It looks at what the grammatical choices do to the listener's perception of reality.
Okay.
In SFL, there is a concept called ideational metafunctions. Essentially, this asks, who is doing the action, what kind of action is it, and what is the context? In the Acharnians, the verbs of doing what we call material processes are overwhelmingly assigned to Dikaiopoulos.
He gets all the action verbs.
Exactly. He is the one making, trading, defeating, and celebrating. The language literally constructs a reality where human ingenuity is the ultimate active force in the universe.
Okay, I see that. And how does Campbell's verbal aspect framework fit into this?
Well, verbal aspect in ancient Greek is deeply misunderstood by a lot of people. We often think of verbs just in terms of tense, past, present, or future. But aspect is really about the author's viewpoint. It communicates how the author wants you to experience the action.
How do you feel it?
Right. Campbell argues that Greek uses the aorist tense to communicate perfective aspect, and this means remoteness. It views an action as a complete whole from a distance.
Okay, let's use an analogy to make this concrete for everyone listening. If we are filming a movie, the aorist aspect is like a drone camera flying 500 feet in the air.
Oh,
right?
that's a great way to put it.
It gives you a wide, distant, objective shot of the entire landscape. You see the whole battlefield, but you don't feel the dirt or the blood. It pushes the action away from the viewer.
That is exactly how it functions. And Aristophanes uses the aorist tense almost exclusively when describing the grim historical realities of the war.
Wait, really? Almost exclusive?
Yes. When the chorus talks about the Spartans invading, or the farms burning, or the devastation of the plague, the grammar is in the aorist. He intentionally grammaticalizes the trauma as remote.
Wow.
He pushes the suffering into the background of the discourse, keeping it at a safe distance from the audience's immediate emotional experience.
That is fascinating. And what does he do when he talks about Dikaiopoulos in his private piece?
He shifts the grammar entirely. For Dikaiopoulos' actions, Aristophanes employs the present and perfect tenses. In Campbell's framework, these tenses communicate imperfective aspect, which signifies proximity.
Okay, so if the aorist is the wide-angle drone shot, the present and perfect tenses are like the body cam.
Yes.
The shaky, handheld camera that puts you right in the middle of the action. It's visceral. It's high definition. You can smell the garlic in the wine.
Exactly. Every time Dikaiopoulos ratifies his treaty, or buys those Megarian piglets, or humiliates Lamachus, the grammar forces the audience to experience that triumph as something immediate and close.
So the grammar is doing the heavy lifting.
The linguistic mechanism is acting as a filter. It blurs out the real-world systemic misery in the background, rendering it out of focus, while simultaneously bringing this completely fabricated, self-made salvation into razor-sharp focus in the foreground.
But wait, let me push back again. Isn't that just how language works naturally? Like, you use past tense for things that happened in the past, like the Spartan invasion, and present tense for the action happening right there on the stage.
It definitely seems that way in English, but Greek aspect is largely independent of absolute time.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, a Greek author can use the aorist for present events if they want to distance them, or the present tense for historical events if they want to make them vivid, what we sometimes call the historical present.
Right.
So the choice to constantly place the war in the remote aspect and the comedic piece in the proximate aspect is a deliberate rhetorical strategy. Aristophanes is using grammar to build a fantasy world.
And this is where the collision with theology actually happens, because it is a fantasy. Dikaiopoulos' salvation is entirely an illusion. He hasn't stopped the war.
Yeah.
He hasn't cured the plague. He's just built a psychological bunker, filled it with wine, and locked the door. The grammar creates a humanistic worldview. The idea that human cleverness can outwit systemic calamity without any need for moral accountability, repentance, or God.
Precisely. And this motif, a catastrophic collective crisis that is resolved by the decisive action of a single man, leading to communal relief, it is not unique to Aristophanes.
Right, it's a common trope.
It was a ubiquitous narrative structure across the ancient Mediterranean. We actually see it in the Hittite plague prayers of King Mursili II.
I'm not familiar with that one.
Well, he cries out to the gods after 20 years of plague, desperately seeking the specific ritual or action required of him as the king to lift the curse from his people. It's that one-man dynamic.
But the researchers for this deep dive point us specifically to the Hebrew Bible to see how this motif is handled within a theocentric worldview. We go from the comic stage of Athens to the threshing floor in 2 Samuel 24. This is our tale of two plagues.
And it's a powerful comparison, because if the Acharnians shows us the human attempt to grammaticalize salvation, 2 Samuel 24 shows us the divine reality. In this text, King David commits a grievous sin against God by taking a census of Israel and Judah.
Now, a modern reader might wonder why counting troops is a thing. Like, isn't that just good administration?
Right, seems harmless to us. But in the ancient Near Eastern context, this is an act of supreme arrogance. David is trusting in the sheer mathematics of his military might rather than the covenantal protection of Yahweh.
He's relying on his own numbers.
Yes. It is a declaration of self-reliance, which is the exact same spirit Dicaeopolis embodies in the play.
Oh, wow. Okay. And because of the king's sin, the collective suffers. A pestilence strikes Israel, and 70,000 people die. We have our systemic crisis. We have our plague. The pressure cooker's boiling, just like in Athens.
Exactly the same setup.
But look at how the one man responds here. David doesn't look for a loophole. He doesn't negotiate a private truce to save his own palace while the people die outside.
No, he is confronted by the prophet Gad, and David's response is immediate, crushing moral accountability. He literally says, I have sinned greatly in what I have done.
Total ownership.
Right. And Gad tells him to go up and build an altar to the Lord on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite.
And the details of this transaction are so critical to our comparison. Araunah offers to just give David the threshing floor, the oxen for the sacrifice, and the wood. Like, it could be a completely free, easy resolution for the king.
A cheap peace treaty, essentially.
Yes. But David refuses. He says, no, but I will buy it from you for a price. I will not offer burnt offerings to the Lord my God that cost me nothing. He buys the floor, he builds the altar, and he offers the sacrifices. And then the text says, so the Lord was entreated for the land, and the plague was stayed from Israel.
The contrast between the Greek farmer and the Hebrew king is absolute. It's night and day.
It really is. Dicaeopolis sees the crisis of his world as an absurd political inconvenience to be outsmarted. But David sees the crisis as a profound relational rupture with the Creator that must be atoned for.
Yes, Dicaeopolis uses wit, trickery, and wine to secure a localized, selfish peace.
Just a party for himself.
Right. David uses repentance, submission, and blood sacrifice to secure the healing of the entire nation. It highlights the difference between treating a symptom and curing a disease.
Yeah, putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound.
Exactly. The Greek comedy diagnoses the pain of the human condition flawlessly, the gridlock, the exhaustion, the desire just to be left alone in peace. But its solution is merely an anesthetic. It numbs the pain for an evening.
But the Old Testament insists you have to go deeper.
It insists that systemic crisis is fundamentally tied to human rebellion. You cannot outsmart the plague. You have to deal with the root infection, which is sin. And the location of David's altar is deeply significant, too.
Right, because that threshing floor later becomes the site of Solomon's temple in Jerusalem.
Yes.
Wow. So David's resolution isn't just a private market in his front yard. It establishes the very epicenter of worship and reconciliation for the entire world. The altar replaces the wineskin.
That's a beautiful way to phrase it.
But, even David's altar, as profound as it is still limited.
Very true.
It stopped that specific plague, but David still died eventually. The Israelites still faced famine, war, and exile later on. The Old Testament foil leaves us hanging a bit. It shows us that true peace requires a sacrifice. But the blood of oxen on a threshing floor can't cure the ultimate plague of human mortality.
Which is exactly why this analysis drives us directly into the New Testament. The researchers argue that Paul, in his letter to the Romans, takes this ancient one-man motif, strips away the inadequacy of David, and applies the exact same linguistic Tamar lens that Aristophanes used to reveal the ultimate reality of Christ.
Let's look closely at Romans chapter 5, starting around verse 12. Paul writes, therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned.
He establishes the ultimate systemic crisis.
Right. Not a Spartan war, not a temporary pestilence, but the cosmic plague of death itself, inaugurated by Adam.
And how does Paul resolve it? He writes, for if many died through one man's trespass, much more have the grace of God and the free gift by the grace of that one man, Jesus Christ, abounded for many.
Christ is the true one man.
Exactly. Where Dicaeopolis achieved a fake peace for his own household, and David achieved a temporary reprieve for Israel, Christ achieves an eternal, cosmic reconciliation that literally breaks the machinery of death.
This is where the linguistic analysis completely blew my mind. When I read the notes for this deep dive, I was stunned. You mentioned earlier that Aristophanes used the aorist aspect to push the trauma into the background, and the present aspect to pull the salvation into the foreground.
Right. The drone cam and the body cam.
Does Paul actually do the same thing in Romans 5?
He does. The Greek text of Romans 5 is a masterclass in verbal aspect.
Hmm.
When Paul describes the entry of Adam's sin and the resulting death, he consistently uses the aorist tense.
Wait, really?
Yes, the verb eilphen sin entered the world. It is the perfective aspect of remoteness. Paul takes the catastrophic trauma of the fall and linguistically pushes it into the background. It is the drone shot. It is a completed reality viewed from a distance.
Wow. So it's acknowledging the ruin, but stripping it of its immediate power to define the present moment.
Exactly. But when Paul turns to the grace of God through Christ, the grammar shifts dramatically. He uses the present and future tenses. The grace of God superabounds. The Greek word is perisui. Those who receive grace will reign in life.
The body can't.
Yes, this is the imperfective aspect of proximity. Paul is taking the triumphant reigning grace of Jesus Christ and dragging it right into the vivid, high-definition foreground of the believer's immediate reality.
That is an unbelievable connection.
Yeah.
I mean, the grammatical mechanism is identical, but the substance is entirely different.
Totally different.
Aristophanes used the grammar to build a lie, a funny lie, but a lie nonetheless that man can save himself. But Paul uses the exact same grammatical structure to declare the truest thing in the universe, that God has saved man.
It's incredible.
The gospel literally reprograms the grammar of our trauma. It puts our sin and death in the background and brings Christ's superabounding grace right up to our faces.
It forces the reader to realize that true shalom, perfect, holistic peace and flourishing is never a DIY project. It is not something you can negotiate, purchase, or outsmart your way into. It is a free gift, entirely dependent on the merit of the true one man.
Man, that totally makes sense. And the deep dive also brings in John chapter 9 to further reframe this, right? The story of the man born blind.
Right, because the disciples see the blind man and immediately ask a cause and effect question. Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? They are operating on a very rigid transactional theology.
And Jesus just shatters that paradigm. He says, it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him.
Which completely flips the script.
It does. Jesus takes human suffering and removes it from the realm of mere absurdity, which is how Aristophanes viewed it, just something to laugh at or escape. And he even removes it from being a direct one-to-one punishment for specific sins, which is how the disciples viewed it. He elevates suffering, turning it into the very canvas upon which God paints his redemptive glory.
So when a Christian today watches the Acharnians or, reads the news or experiences personal tragedy, they don't have to retreat into the cynical escapism of Dicaeopolis. We don't have to tie an informer in a box and pretend everything is fine.
Or you don't have to build a bunker.
We can look at the brokenness of the world and know that it is the aorist background against which the proximate grace of Christ is currently operating.
That's the theological payoff right there. That's the core of it. But I have to say, it raises a massive historical and practical question for me.
Let's hear it.
If this pagan play is so rife with humanism, escapism, and, let's be honest, obscenity, why should a Christian read it at all? Why not just read Romans and be done with it?
It's a very fair point.
Like, why dig through the mud to find this grammatical parallel?
Yeah.
And this tension is precisely what the early church fathers wrestled with when confronting classical literature, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And their reactions were incredibly polarized.
I mean, the Roman Empire was saturated with this kind of theater.
Yeah.
How did the earliest Christian leaders, who were often facing actual martyrdom, view the comedic stage?
Well, you had a very vocal, strict camp led by fathers like Tertullian in North Africa, writing around 197 CE. In his work De Spectaculis, Tertullian didn't just dislike the theater, he viewed it as structurally demonic. Yes. He argued that the entire apparatus of the stage, the emotional manipulation, the glorification of vice, the idol worship embedded in the festivals, it was all designed to pollute the soul.
Augustine echoed this heavily a couple of centuries later, didn't he?
He did.
In his Confessions, he talks about how deeply he was moved by tragic plays in his youth, and he looks back on it with absolute horror. He realized the theater was training his heart to love the wrong things. It stirred up false pity for fictional characters while he ignored the actual suffering of his real neighbors.
And in his magnum opus, The City of God, Augustine draws a stark line. He looks the kind of peace the Roman world offered, the Pax Romana, which is essentially the same fragile, self-serving peace Dicaeopolis fabricated, and he contrasts it with the eternal peace of the city of God.
Right.
For Augustine and Tertullian, the theater was a rival liturgy. It promised a form of salvation, a catharsis, but it delivered nothing but illusion and spiritual death.
So if I'm an early Christian reading Tertullian, I am burning my copies of Aristophanes. I'm not looking for grammatical parallels. But that wasn't the only perspective in the early church. There were voices arguing that throwing out the entire classical corpus was a mistake.
Yes. The nuance came from fathers who were deeply steeped in classical rhetoric themselves. Basil the Great wrote a foundational text called Address to Young Men on the Right Use of Greek Literature.
A very practical guide.
Exactly. He knew that to engage the culture, Christians needed to understand it. And Basil used a beautiful, enduring metaphor, the bee. He said that when a bee lands on a flower, it doesn't consume the entire plant.
It just takes what it needs.
Right. It carefully extracts the sweet nectar and leaves the poison behind. Christians, he argued, should read pagan literature the same way. We extract the rhetorical brilliance, the profound observations of human nature, and the longing for virtue, but we spit out the idolatry and the vice.
I mean, that requires an immense amount of spiritual maturity. You have to know the difference between the nectar and the poison.
Absolutely. And perhaps the most fascinating example of this is John Chrysostom. His name literally means golden mouth, recognizing him as one of the greatest preachers in church history.
Yes.
He was fiercely critical of the immorality of the theater from the pulpit, yet historical traditions and later Byzantine sources claim that Chrysostom literally slept with a copy of Aristophanes under his pillow.
That is such a jarring image. The greatest moral preacher of his age, sleeping with the raunchiest playwright of antiquity under his head. Why?
Because Aristophanes was a master of the Greek language. Chrysostom studied the playwright's biting, fiery rhetoric, his pacing, his ability to diagnose the hypocrisy of the state. He harvested the rhetorical nectar of the comedy to make his own preaching of the gospel sharper and more penetrating.
He used the enemy's tools.
He understood that you cannot effectively critique a culture you do not understand.
This brings us right to the practical application for us today, the central focus of our deep dive. How does reading a 2,400-year-old comedy, equipped with this linguistic and biblical analysis, actually inspire a Christian to love Christ more deeply and live for him more fully? I mean, what does the listener take away from this right now?
First, I think it provides a breathtaking clarity to our theology. We often treat the gospel as an abstract set of propositions. But when you immerse yourself in the sheer desperation of the Acharnians, when you see how desperately humanity longs for peace and how pitiful our best attempts to manufacture it truly are, the free gift of Christ's peace becomes intensely, overwhelmingly beautiful.
It makes the contrast so sharp.
Exactly. Seeing the limits of Dicaeopolis makes the limitless grace of Romans 5 explode off the page. It makes you love the Savior who didn't just offer us a sip of wine, but gave us his own blood to secure an eternal treaty.
It also acts as a profound diagnostic tool for our own hearts. Think about your own life. We are constantly tempted to negotiate our own private truces with the chaos of the modern world.
Oh, every day.
We face economic anxiety, political tribalism, social upheaval. And our culture offers us 1,000 different versions of Dicaeopolis's wineskin. The world tells us if you just buy this product, if you just isolate yourself in this specific gated community, if you just numb yourself with endless digital entertainment, you will find peace.
But the Acharnians trains us to spot those lies and laugh at their absurdity.
Yes.
When the culture tries to sell us its version of the Megarian piglets, hollow, degrading solutions dressed up as necessities, we can see through the disguise. We aren't paralyzed by the world's false promises because we already possess the ultimate reality.
And practically, it completely reshapes how we view suffering. Dicaeopolis looked at the starving Megarian and saw an opportunity for a joke and a cheap trade. He isolated himself, but the Christian is called to step into the aorist background of the world's pain.
To run toward the suffering, not away from it.
Right. Recognizing the historical reality of the war-weary Athenians builds our empathy. It breaks our hearts for the refugees, the marginalized, and those crushed by systemic failures in our own cities today. We don't retreat into a private market. We carry the proximate grace of Christ out into the ruin.
That is the exact trajectory of the Christian life. And it all points toward a radically different eschatological hope. Look at how Aristophanes ends his play. It's a riotous feast. Dicaeopolis is victorious, drinking wine, surrounded by spoils.
But it's a hollow victory. The feast ends. The sun comes up. The Spartans are still outside the walls. Nothing actually changed.
But the biblical narrative ends with a feast that never stops. The marriage supper of the Lamb in Revelation 19. The comedy gives us a fractured, distorted, pre-Christian shadow of what a victory feast looks like. It shows us that humanity knows deep down that the story is supposed to end with a celebration where the suffering is gone and the righteous are vindicated.
Wow. So as we engage with this text, we can smile at the playwright's attempt to draw a picture of peace, while weeping with gratitude that Jesus Christ actually built the house. We don't have to manufacture our own joy. We are invited to a table prepared by the King.
That's beautifully said.
I want to pull all these threads together as we wrap up. We began in the freezing winter of 425 BCE, surrounded by plague and political madness. We watched a clever farmer use wit, parody, and a smuggled wineskin to carve out a microscopic oasis of fake peace.
A completely DIY salvation.
Right, and then we peeled back the grammar to see how the language itself pushed the trauma away and pulled the fantasy close. We stood on the threshing floor with David, realizing that true peace requires a costly sacrifice. And finally, we saw how the Apostle Paul hijacked that exact same linguistic camera lens to declare that the grace of the ultimate one man, Jesus Christ, has shattered the plague of death and superabounds in our present reality.
We traveled from the absolute limits of human ingenuity to the limitless, unmerited grace of divine reality. And as we close, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final thought that pushes beyond the text of the play itself.
What happened after the festival? Did this brilliant play actually change anything in Athens?
It didn't.
Really?
No, the war raged on for decades. Athens was ultimately crushed. But more interestingly, the very next year, Aristophanes entered a new play into the competition called The Clouds. And instead of wrapping his critique in a joyous, fantastical peace treaty, he delivered a much more direct, stark warning about the moral decay of Athenian society.
And how did that go over?
He lost. The audience completely rejected it, and it forces us to ask a terrifying question about human nature. Are we so deeply resistant to the truth that we will only accept it if it is dressed up as a joke? And if so, how does that reality shape the way you, as a Christian, are called to communicate the unvarnished, offensive, and ultimately glorious truth of the gospel to a world that just wants to be entertained?
Man, that is a staggering question to carry with us this week. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep looking for those profound echoes of the gospel, even in the most unexpected and seemingly profane corners of history. Until next time, keep exploring.